Rebonjour.
Welcome back.
Tout le monde a pris son café. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
So,
Oui?
can you hear me well?
On a pris son café.
Great.
Bravo, tout le monde. Il n'y a pas eu d'incident. Tout le monde a fermé son
So,
micro. Est-ce que
everyone
d'autres choses
turned off their
tout se
microphone.
passe bien, tout se déroule
Everything's
bien.
fine.
Nous voici rendus donc à la table ronde
Now we're at the round
d'accueil que
table number
j'anime
2.
toujours avec
I'm still your
Madame
moderator.
Prieur. Merci beaucoup de
Thank you
l'avoir
very
passé
much for
à l'essuie-tout.
attending.
Alors, l'objectif de cette
So,
deuxième table ronde,
the
c'est de
objective
présenter
for the second
à
conference,
SMA tantôt
well,
Sophie
I said
Valais.
earlier,
On va
S called
présenter la directive
SMA,
européenne sur les services de médias
but we're going to talk
audiovisuels.
about the
Et
European
pour
Directive
présenter
on
oui,
audio and
dans
visual. And we're going to have
dans
3
les quotas
examples.
de l'Union européenne,
We're going to have examples
les
of
compagnies
3
aériennes sont
European
plusieurs.
states.
Elles vont mettre l'accent sur les exigences minimum
We're going to talk
de
about the
publication, de
minimal
mise en valeur et la participation financière
parameters
à création
for the
d'entrepreneurs
content
nationaux.
in national
Alors, je vais vous
context.
présenter d'abord
So
nos
I
panélistes.
will
Il y
first
a Sophie
introduce
Valais,
our
qui est
presenter,
présidente
Sophie Valais.
de
She's
l'Observatoire
an
européen
advisor
de l'audiovisuel.
at
On a
the
ensuite
European
donc
Audiovisual
on a
Observatory.
ensuite Mathieu
We
Fournet,
have
directeur de la
Mathieu
francophonie
Fournet,
internationale du
director
Centre
of
national du
the
cinéma et de
National
l'image
Center
animée
of
en
Cinema
France.
in
Guillaume
France.
Prieur,
Guillaume Prieur,
directeur des affaires
director
institutionnelles et
of the
européennes de la
institutional
Société des auteurs et
of the
compositeurs
Society of
français.
Authors.
Il est
He
secrétaire
is
général pardon, de la coalition
General
française pour la
Secretary
diversité
of the
culturelle, les commissions européennes des médias de
Diversity
la
in Europe,
FPCDC.
the
Luis
FPCDC.
Alfonso
Luis
Albornoz,
Alfonso
professeur expert
Albornoz,
de la
professor
Convention
and
de 2005.
expert of the
Daniel Condeminas,
2005
conseiller de la
convention.
Fédération des
We
organisations
also
culturelles
have
catalanes. Et
the
Christine Merkel,
Daniel
directrice de la
Condeminas,
division de la
Christine
culture, de la
Taquel.
communication et de la mémoire du monde de la Commission allemande pour l'UNESCO.
She
Évidemment, je
works
suis très fière
at
de
the
ça.
German Council at
Ensuite,
UNESCO.
pour
So
nous
everyone knows this by heart,
mener en
right?
panéliste, donc Sophie Valais nous
So
présentera
Sophie
directement
Vallet will
et va se
present
concentrer
us.
principalement sur son article
She's
13.
going to talk
Après
about
ça, on va aussi
Article
offrir
13.
un bref aperçu de sa mise
She's
en
going
œuvre
to
au niveau national
talk about
au sein de
how this
l'Union
is
européenne.
applied
Mathieu Fournet
at a
nous
national
présentera les
level
mesures mises en place
in
en
the
France pour
European
transposer
Union.
la directive. Guillaume
We're also
Prieur
going
va
to
faire le
talk
point sur
about
la
what is going on
transposition
in
sur la
France.
transposition qui est effectuée
We're
en
going to
France.
talk about
Et
civil
Mathieu
society,
Albornoz va
and
présenter
Luis
la
Afronto
procédure
will
mise en place
present
en
the
Espagne pour
measures that are being
transposer
put in
la directive.
Spain
Daniel
in order
Condeminas va
to
réagir à
adapt
certains
this
dossiers
directive.
catalans plus précisément. Il y a
We're
des
going to
parallèles
talk about
intéressants à faire avec Québec
Catalonia.
en
There
abordant
is
le volet européen,
interesting
en abordant notamment la
parallels to be
question
made with
linguistique
Quebec and
et la manière
Canada
avec laquelle
because there are some
la
linguistics
transposition est
issues.
effectuée en Allemagne.
And
Alors,
we're
Sophie,
also
c'est à
going to
vous.
talk
Je
about
vais
the
commencer
situation in
avec vous.
Germany. So
Merci
first,
d'être là.
Sophie,
Bonjour à
please,
toutes et à tous.
you have the floor. Hello.
Merci à la CDEC et à la
First of
HCCD
all,
d'avoir organisé cette
thank you very
conférence
much to the
internationale.
CDEC to organize this international
Et merci
conference.
d'avoir invité
Thank you very
l'Observatoire
much
européen de
for
l'audiovisuel à cet événement.
inviting
Je vais
the
pour ma part donc
European
vous présenter
Audiovisual Observatory to
l'approche
this
européenne
event. So first,
en
I'm going to
matière
talk about the
d'audiovisuel
European
européenne
approach.
telle qu'elle a été fixée et
I'm
les
going to
modifications
tell you
contenues dans la
how it
directive
has been
sur les services de
established
médias audiovisuels de 2018.
with the media of
Si
audiovisual
je
in
me rappelle, cette
2018.
directive
So let's
s'est écrite en
recall
1989. Elle a été
the
révisée
origins are in
depuis
1989,
et la dernière révision a eu
and
lieu
the
en
last
2018.
review
Elle a marqué un
has been done in
changement majeur,
2018.
notamment
There
pour
were
la
some great
multiplication
change,
des œuvres adaptées aux
especially when it
services de médias
comes to
audiovisuels à la demande.
the
Et donc,
audiovisual
ce sont là-dessus que
services,
je vais me
and
concentrer
it is on
aujourd'hui,
these aspects that I will focus my speech
comme vous
today.
l'avez indiqué. Donc,
As you
les
have
principales
said, we're going
obligations
to talk about the
européennes
main
et également
obligations, the
donner
latest one,
un survol très
and we're
rapide
going
en
to
10
do
minutes de
an
d'où on en est au
overview
niveau
in a few
national.
minutes to tell you where we
Je
are
vais
at
laisser
a
place à
national
quelques
level. So I'm going
instants.
to start by sharing my screen.
Est-ce que ça marche?
Is it
Oui,
working?
d'accord.
Can you
Alors,
see?
avant de commencer,
So
pour ceux
first of
qui
all,
ne connaissent pas,
for those who are
une
not
petite introduction à
aware, well, let me start
l'observatoire.
with
Donc,
a quick
l'observatoire est un
introduction.
organisme
So
du
the
service
observatory
public
is an organization from public
fonctionnaire
service.
à
It
Strasbourg,
depends on the
en France.
European Council in
Et il y a
Strasbourg,
30
and
ans, donc en
it
1992,
has been
avec pour mission
created 30
principale
years ago
de
in
collecter des
1992,
informations
and it
sur les
collects
marchés audiovisuels
information
des
on
États membres,
audiovisual
également l'Union
markets
européenne
of
et
all
les
the
observations
member
de la
states.
Commission européenne, et d'analyser ces
and it has to analyze the information, produce report, different maps, takes care of database. We can see this on our website. So we want to have a greater transparency of what is going on in audiovisual markets. All right, this has been a brief introduction. Next slide, I'm going to talk about the state of implementation in 2018 before talking about the obligations. So the directive has been adopted in 2018, and the latest changes have been done in 2020. So the delay, of course, has not been respected because only 19 states have notified the law. And even for these 19 states, still some things still have to be adapted. And 8 countries have not adapted completely. So this means that we're not evaluating the effects of this directive. I also wanted to add something. Something has been said in the previous panel. I would like to talk about it. We have similar worries in Canada and in Europe, and that is quite interesting. I also see that when it comes to the promotion of arts, may they be linear, may they be traditional, may they be from TV, may they be also non-linear, what I call the VED services. When it comes to the linear services, when it comes to television, obligations have not changed in 2018. There's still a quota of 50% of European content that has to be broadcast. And there's also a quota of independent European of 10%. 10% of the programming budget. And over this, there has not been any changes. However, there has been an evolution, a fundamental one, when it comes to the promotion of non-linear, which means video on demand. Let's think about Netflix or Amazon. YouTube is not qualified as an audiovisual service. So the obligations are the following. They have been reinforced because states have seen that between 2010 and 2018, there has been enormous evolution. For instance, how everything is being created, the content's being created. And now they have to contribute to the ecosystem in order to create some kind of fairness and to be more in pair with the linear services. So now there's already a quota. There must be a quota of Europeans in the video on demand services. I think that we have talked about, there are different terms that are being here used, but I would say that they're being put forward. On top of the current obligations, the 2018 directives offers the possibility to states to contribute financially. Maybe that be by production, maybe on paying an indirect tax. And the latest change with this directive, and I can see that in Canada, you're thinking about the same thing. It is how can we enforce these rules to players that are actually outside of the borders. So how can we force supply of content providers that are in another state? So we have talked about this in the previous panel. We need a better coordination. We need a greater coordination from the regulator, because we're talking about here's 27 different regulators with different financial means, and there are also some different points of view because every country has its own approach. So it's not easy. a lot of work has started, and the regulars work for 2-3 years on these questions to have a common understanding. On top of that, the Commission has clarified certain aspects because there are already some rules for specific services. Sometimes some services have a low rating or they don't have many people watching it. So there has to be some criteria. And there are also other concepts such as what is a catalog, what is a title, what is a movie, is it a series, is it a chapter? So there's a lot of details that we hope through this will help. So when it comes to the transposition here, it is difficult to describe clearly what is going on because only 19 countries have provided all the information and sometimes it is incomplete. Yes, there is a law, but we have to see all the details. But what we can see is the idea to have a quota on the catalog. Well, that already exists. And it existed before 2018. And we can see that most countries have put in place these kinds of quotas. May they be for in a constraining way or by a different amount, or for sometimes the provider would choose between either a quota or an investment. They would have an option. And what that we see is that when there is a constraining quota, a percentage specific, then it would be quite varied because it could go from 10% in Slovenia or 50% in Lithuania or 60% in France. So there is a great disparity. But the idea here, the idea of a quota has already been established. And what does it change? What does it mean? Well, it means that the quota starts to become more constraining. All these state members that are about to have an obligation of 30%, well, some countries have been a little bit beyond that. Well, and also there's some countries have been analyzing to increase the quota over time. Sometimes we have something below the quotas. Sometimes we have some different quotas for a national language and a sub-language. So we see that the majority are around the 30%. The main part is around 30%. And also the main obligation when it comes to the investment existed before the directive. So we're talking about here the video on demand services, private ones, and many states already put in place an obligation for investment. Sometimes as an optional level, sometimes as a general version. But we see that there's a trend here. Then when we're talking about the percentage, well, there's a great disparity because it could be 2%, or when we see Greece, Denmark, or France is much higher, or Italy is also quite high. But another type of intervention is a tax. This is an indirect contribution. It could be to buy some rights. It could be the contribution through financing through some general funds. What is new now is that countries that have put in place these directives will be able to add it to services that come from another country that is not in their territory. And this is a great leap forward in the audiovisual universe, European universe. Because so far, we always had the approach of the origin country when we think about the quota. And with the system, now it's the country where the viewers are that will have to have the access. So this create some sort of hybrid system, and we will need collaboration with the regulators. So to conclude, when we talk about the prominence obligation, well, most states don't define what the value is. So it is not defined in the directive. It was not in 2010. But for instance, there could be a specific bank for a European content. It could be a research. It could be banners. It could be different things. So we see that most states do not define this case. In certain times, they ask the regulators to intervene. So I will stop here. This was a very quick overview. So the frame is here. It is quite ambitious. Now we have to put it in place. This establishes a participation system with the video on demand. We hope that the next steps will be in 2 years. There will be a report, and there will be a report to the Commission, and every 3 years. And then in 2026, we will going to have a real evaluation of these obligations on this sector. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Sophie Valais. It was quite technical. This is a large project. We needed to explain it well. So thank you very much for explaining it. It has been quite appreciated. Now, Mathieu Fournet, I think that there's a lot of technical aspects. Maybe if you, for the next panelist, could you please speed it up and keep it at 8 minutes? So Mathieu, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy at the CNC to be able to participate to this exchange and to this webinar. So the CNC, as you may know, this is specific to France because we are autonomous, financed by taxpayers' money, and we are also relieving to the French Ministry of Culture. And this has been modernized since 1946. We're very happy to participate today because, as you may know, France is the presidency of the European Union for the 13th time since January 1st, and this is something that is quite symbolic because, as you know, we talked quite some times in this webinar. We are at a turning point. The current platforms exploded that may be in France, in Europe. Let's take an example with Netflix. Netflix has an incredible growth. Just look at what happened between 2019 and 2020. So it's true, we thought about new tools to reinforce European content. We have reinforced the possibility to be able to let our businesses work and grow. So I just had a presentation on the European Audiovisual Observatory. And we're going to talk about what happened since 2008. And the article that interests us the most is Article 13. And this gives the possibility to member state. This is point number 2. So I don't want to be too technical, but it gives the possibility to the member states to impose rules on the audiovisual content providers on their territory, and they have obligations for financing to make the promotion of audiovisual content. So this possibility, well, France, of course, took took the lead, and France decided to create legislation in order to create investment. And this is something that we have passed last June 22nd. It's called the SMAT decree. And from now, there's an obligation for the European creation of content. And this is has to be 20% of their revenues and 20% of the revenue in France. And this can be quite interesting for today's exchange because this will lead to more independent creation content. So the independent creation content at the cinema, this also in lower content, there has to be the promotion of French language content, and this has been established to 75%. So you understand that what has been put in place in France creates the maximum protection for cultural diversity in France in order to promote independent production and French production. And what is quite interesting here is that in a parallel, there has been also ways to protect authors. There has been also ways to protect intellectual property. And also, consequently, there is the access to tax credit. And this is now in the contracts that are written with authors. And there's also the moral rights that are being protected. I will also add that the choice that has been done in France is not exclusive between obligation of investments and tax, because the content provider are also taxed at a percentage on their revenue. And this tax is also on the linear content provider, which means television. So we had last Tuesday a conference in France, and this was about the content that is done at the cinema. And there are some parallels here. In France, there has been a new international accord, a chronology between media. This means there has been an agreement. There's an agreement on the movies that are released in different channels. So the integration of the platforms, because with the decree, and of course, with the new chronological accord of the media, this allows to reach our objectives, which is to allow viewers to have access to a large catalog of content, and also to enable content creators to be able to produce. I could go into more details, but I don't want to speak for too long. But this new chronology gives a window into platforms such as cinema, and it also allows it gives also another window on television from 8 to 6 months. So it's also the percentage also changing for the movies at the cinema. So I cannot say more, but I can tell you that it's very important it's important to exchange with Canada, Spain, Belgium, and we have to work together in order to integrate the platform in diversity. And at the CNC, that's what we do. We work bilaterally or multilaterally, and we have been able to see this week that these exchanges are quite productive. For instance, in Belgium and the French part of Belgium, there has been a request that has been asked by the CSA Belge to make a transposition to have obligation of investment to provide content for the French community in Belgium. and that has been put in place in France. There has been discussions in Germany and other countries of the European Union. So we, all right. Thank you very much, Mathieu.
So thank you very much. So if you have any questions, of course, you can write them in the chat. We will have a question period after. You can also raise your hand later on. Just want a quick reminder for those who were not there earlier. So now I will leave the floor to Mr. Prieur. He's the Secretary General on the diversity in the European nations and Secretary of the CDEC. Hello. So hello, everyone. Thank you for having us this morning. So I won't add on what Mathieu already talked about the French transition, but just a quick word because it's work that's being done in concert with professionals and the civil society. So all these regulations are, everyone is very satisfied about the results, and just like Mathieu talked about this, in France there was a transposition which was very ambitious but is very successful. And there's also regulation about investments, and it's very important. So we're very satisfied about the results. We're very satisfied about the method that was used, or about transposition, about the decree. There was important work that was done around the topic. And to show just perhaps a small thing to mention, since we're talking about processes that take a long time, there was excellent work that was done by the French government. However, there was a bit of a disappointment on our end at the end of the process, because after the decree, there was work that was done by the CSA to conclude some conventions with the different platforms, with Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon. And all the great work from the French government was a bit undermined by the CSA, which signed convention that reduced some of the very important measures. And these are, this is a bit disappointing. And unfortunately, it was the regulations were a bit weakened in these conventions. So I don't want to mention too much about this. There's quite a lot of things that were done that were right, but this is to give you a real overview of the landscape right now and about the work that's left to be done as well. So for us, it's very important because there's a bill, there's a decree, but it's also a European directive. So it's extremely important for us that these transpositions that are done in other countries, these are processes that take a long time, and they need to be ambitious as well. The goal is not to have a France that has obligations that are very ambitious, and then in other European countries, we're on very lax rules. So we need, hopefully everything that's done in France will be an example for the other countries as well, so that each country can define their own rate and their own regulations. And the stronger these rules are, the more we'll be able to support national and European content as well. So this would be a very great point to work on. You need to have convictions, and you need to have the will to do these directives. So they need to be put into place accordingly and with strength in all European countries. Two other topics that are very important to us for the future. There's the question on how we can define the European work. So about the logic behind the investments and how can we define European work, which depends on other conventions, other European convention, which targets other steps than those that are directly in the Euro Union. So of course, with Brexit, these questions or even more important, to know how can we treat the British work, which are still a big part, that we still consider as European work, because there's some work to be done there, and there's work that's going on right now as well to measure what represents these work, especially as it concerns the broadcasting of this work on various platforms. And I wanted to end with this last point, but certainly not the least, but it's the framework on all the thinking that's being done about all of this, about the different reforms, and it's how we can work on discoverability. Because as I've said, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but what we obtained with the directive right now went beyond the expectations that we could have in 2015, 2016. There was excellent work that was done there to get to those directives. And that's great about broadcasting and investments. But globally, we're in a logic that's about obligations that are based on quantity. So there's some quotas and there's some rates. It's extremely important. Of course, there's also the necessity to put forward the Euro creations, but it's a tool that is not always easily definable, because each platform has its own ergonomy, and discoverability is an important point there as well, and can take various forms depending on the country. So really working on these algorithms and how we can get these algorithms to promote cultural diversity, because we know that many algorithms in VOD services are algorithms that are linked with consumption. These algorithms will keep you in a cultural universe that's familiar to you because it's related to what you've watched. So if you love American movies, then the algorithm will give you more American movies. And music, which is another topic for us, is really about having an approach that is much more qualitative. Because if we have European work, but if these Euro work are on page 27, then no one will get there. So nobody will get to them quickly. But if the algorithms, perhaps they could put them forward, if the algorithms had the objective of cultural diversity and discoverability. So this way we could have a presence which would be easy to get to. And for us, that's the most important issue for the future of these directives. And this will be discussed in perhaps 1 or 2 years at the Euro level. Thank you very much, Guillaume Prieur. It was, thank you, very good information. So now Luis Alfonso, who will talk to us about the 2005 convention. So in which language will you talk to us right now? So either we will have to brush off our Spanish or use the interpretation. So Luis Alfonso, I'm giving you the floor. Yes. Thank you very much.
Seguirme en alguna cuestión técnica del proyecto de ley de comunicación audiovisual que voy a presentar. En primer lugar, quería agradecer a la Coalición para la Diversidad de las Expresiones Culturales y a la Cátedra UNESCO para la Diversidad de las Expresiones Culturales por la invitación y felicitarlos por la organización de esta importante conferencia internacional. Tengo poco tiempo. También quiero agradecer, por supuesto, a los traductores que están trabajando hoy con nosotros. Voy a ir directamente al grano. Primeramente quería hacer algunas dos consideraciones generales, si se quiere. Y la primera se puede reducir en las palabras España va tarde. Es decir, España todavía no hizo la transposición de la directiva, ya fue apercibida por el Ejecutivo Comunitario, envió a Madrid un dictamen motivado en septiembre de 2021 en el que reclamó acelerar los plazos. Actualmente hay un proyecto de ley que ya está en el Congreso de los Diputados y que fue publicado en el boletín oficial, y el plazo de enmiendas...
A bill that was published in the official bulletin, and there are delays that are good for 7th of February. This is going to be 7th of February, but there could be an extension. But we calculate that from now to about a month, if everything goes well, Spain will finally, belatedly, be able to move forward. Now, this bill was developed by the digital transformation. There was no direct intervention from the Department of Culture in the project. This project was developed by Economy and Culture. Now, there's another item which is related to the fact that this bill was developed in a context where Spain is trying to seduce foreign companies for them to come and settle down in Spain. There's a plan called Spain Audiovisual Hub of Europe, which was presented to Europe by the current government of Spain, where we try to seduce businesses like Netflix or Disney for part of their production to be done in Spain. So the bill, if I may, has a very clear mercantile point of view, and there's a whole challenge concerning self-regulation. Now, tangibly, the bill, I would say there's the first observation we could make is that the bill does not mention the Convention on the Protection of Promotion of Diversity Cultural Expression. It's important because, as is mentioned in the preamble and the current cinema law of 1997, well, it's out of question. Moreover, I would say that the concept of diversity in the audiovisual sector is not dealt with in a differentiated way in the bill, as we can see with other notions, for example. The section of 414 are principles of audiovisual communication, and we find human dignity and pluralism and the gender equality, the official language of the state, and so on.
No es fuente doctrinal en la exposición de motivos, ni en los principios básicos, ni tiene desarrollo en el articulado.
But I would say that diversity is not something that is developed in the article per se, as my colleague mentioned. So about the quota, the Euro quota that we just talked about, I would say that there are some quotas for the traditional TV and for the video on demand service that are working with the public in the Spanish market. And for TV, there's no changes there. They need to have at least 51% of their program from your work. And half of this 51% must be reserved for Spanish work or in one of the official languages of the autonomous regions in the country, so Catalan or so. And for the services, such as radio, TV, they need to have 15% of work from the official languages of the autonomous regions. So there's some new stuff In the service catalogs of video on demand, operators need to reserve 30% of their catalog to European works. At a minimum, half of this 30% must be reserved to Spanish work or in one of the official languages of the autonomous regions of Spain. And in this quota, there will be a minimum of 40% of work in the region autonomous regions. So some considerations about these articles, say 113 and 113, I would first say that there's a bit of a disbalance about what's demanded about old operators and new on-demand operators. Also, there's these services that are produced on demand. The requirements are very minimal, only 30% of the quota. We could get into a debate there about what it should have been, or perhaps we should have done like Belgium, like Sophie explained, or perhaps like France has done, such as increasing the percent of the catalog of what is reserved for European work. About the services, such as TV, so 50% must be done for European work, will be reserved for Spanish or other official languages of the autonomous regions without specifying anything else about these quotas, such as minority languages. This could mean that we are focusing on the Spanish language and not to the community languages. So finally, I would say, I would like to comment the fact that about VOD, the European guidelines kind of divide the guidelines because there's the European and the non-European. This is a bit of a problem, in my opinion, because in the bill, we don't think about measures that could divide the non-European segment. So the 40% for linear TV, it's 60% in the catalogs. I believe that's a bit of a problem from a diversity point of view, as far as the origin of the work that is being done there. And we should consider that Spain integrates the liberal American community, also about the chart, and which supports, since its creation in '95, the IBER media program. I think it would be important, in my opinion, to force and to enforce the Ibero-American work here. As a research group, we participate in the corrective process for the build project, and we proposed 10% annually of programs for TV for Ibero-American work, and also 10% of the VOD catalog. Next topic to finish, the importance of European work, discoverability. The bill does not have the theme of discoverability. The Article 2 of the bill project, which contains 21 definitions such as audiovisuals, communication services, program catalog, TV programs, video created by users, etc. But we do not talk about the prominence or about the discoverability of European works. And nothing is mentioned as well about the suppliers of linear TV to make sure that this discoverability is strong. It's not there at all. And to finish, oh, my bad. Oh, here we have the financing to European work. Here, the operators of linear TV, such as VOD operators, on the Spanish territory should finance European works. There's three ways to do this: through direct participation in the production of works, also by acquisition of exploitation rights, or direct contribution to the IFCCD's Film Protection Fund. For the percentage, there's a clear division between the operators of public services that need to have 6% of their yearly finance to the audiovisual your work, and the private sector that need to dedicate 5% of annual revenues to this. Some considerations about all of this. This comes back to the decisions of operators on how we will channel the money that they will invest. So there's three ways that we talked about. Nothing else has been mentioned. Nothing is privileged as well. As for the analysts say, well, 5 or 6%, that's a very low percentage. Some say that we should at least increase this to 10%. Such as, for example, France, it's at 25% for this topic. Thirdly, we also see no mention at all about diversity clauses to avoid that the money focuses in investments or in certain genres. And finally, and I believe this is part of a great debate here, what do we mean by independent producers as far as money that's directed to independent production? I will read to finish 2 sentences from the communique that was published at the end of December last year for independent producer. Here's what it says. The great channels, the great foreign investors really took over production rights, and very often, even with the ownership of society of many producers, who one day were independent, but now are instruments of content suppliers. One of the biggest preoccupations here is this relationship and what the law allows as far as the definition of what an independent group actually is. And this is a very big issue, especially for those who belong to great international group. So I'm going to close this citation here. So there's a great debate here, and we hope to be able to change certain elements of the law to really define what is an independent producer. So I will stop my presentation here. I think my colleagues will talk about linguistic diversity, which is another great topic of debate in our country. So thank you very much. Could you hear me? So, Daniel, thank you very much. So you are a counselor for the Catalan language here, so the floor is yours. Hello. I would like to congratulate the organizers of the international seminar for this initiative, which is very interesting and very useful for languages such as mine, so Catalan. So I would like to thank you for the invitation and to share my thoughts with you. So I want to thank you. So I would like to say mention some data. Catalan is spoken by more than 10 million people it's the most spoken languages in Europe, it's still not the official language. It's a bit of an anomaly. And it's the language of a region here, a 4 European region. And in Candor, it's the official language. But Andorra is not part of the European Union. In Spain, there's also some Catalan in the Valencia community, and in the north as well, and in the west, the Catalan territory, and in the east as well. In northern Catalan, there's also some there as well, and there's also some in the on the Italian front. So I would like to talk about one of the principles here. First principle. There needs to be 1% at least allocated to promote the general content here, so to really underline the objective of cultural diversity, and that all measures being taken by the CETA need to respect cultural and linguistic diversity following the directives of the UNESCO. And this promotion of diversity is important. I would focus on the legislative situation of Catalan in Spain. I would like to mention about, do quick mention about French legislation. French legislation doesn't force a quota about Catalan content or on digital platform, not for, and this is a bit of a problem. This defense of linguistic community is not focused on here. So what I would say in the Catalan sector is share concerns with some other regions. I want to mention other languages as well. Some data. There's quite a few people here in those regions with another language than Spanish. It's about 1/3. So in 2010, the law was made in 2010, did not have any quotas for Catalan. This means, for example, that no TV program on the private sector that has programs for all Spain don't offer Catalan. And this is quite a bit of a problem. So the old legislation talked about territory division for TV. But in the audiovisual law that's current, Catalan is just one option and there's no obligations. So TV are only made in Spanish, and in the content offer is really low. And unfortunately today, it's only a footnote, and that's really bad. So this is completely different than official language in Europe, even those that have less people than Catalan. So in the law project that the government presented to the public, in the text, there was no quota or guarantee for Catalan on essential questions.
Dans l'offre de contenu, séries,
So in the offer of content, documentaries and other programs, now in the obligations of investments in new productions, content offer and obligations of new investments for new production. These two serious gaps have led to a lot of controversy. The government, the autonomous government institutions, cultural entities, and professional organizations have presented many allegations for the establishment of quotas or guarantees for languages other than Spanish. After negotiation between the Spanish government and the main Catalan parliamentary groups, a bill was approved, which appeared, and which has a few changes, which I will now explain, and which I will complete with what has been done in the negotiations after the legislative bill. So a kind of second part of the political negotiations. And the bill is still a text which is clearly insufficient, according to many people and me, if it concerns minimally fair quotas for Catalan language. So whether for investments or new productions. Let's start with offer. Now, concerning traditional television, an offer must include 15% in Catalan of the percentage of contents in one of the official languages. So 51% of the minimum European limits. In consequence, less than 4% of the Catalan for the whole content. We will see if these figures can be increased because they're very small. Now, the over-the-tops, other platforms, it would be 40% of 50% for the official language of the minimum 30% of the European content, 10% in Catalan of all of the whole offer. Also, a new article was introduced on the promotion of languages for dubbing and subtitles. There's a very generic formulation, very imprecise. The modifications would be used to place the Catalan AV Council as a competent organization to guarantee that all the dubbing available today, because the film was broadcast, for example, in public TV in Catalonia, or the dubbing was paid for, as well as those that will be done in the future, they will be integrated in the linguistic options of this platform. Finally, even though in a very generic way, the Catalan Sign Language is different from that of Spanish, was integrated in the article on the offer of content in a sign language. So the obligation in the new productions, as opposed to the French law, which sets obligations for platforms of 20 to 25% of their income for the European production, the Spanish wording only requires 5% and no quota for Catalan. The modification negotiated will mean that 15% of the money allocated to independent producers, whether the 70% of the total, would go to the film series and comments and of Catalan, i.e. 10% of the financial obligations. Now, many other issues remain. Many other questions remain. We don't know if they will be integrated in the final draft. So if we think about the citizens who connect themselves to a platform, the prominence, or at least the preponderance of Catalan contents in the offer of the over-the-top for the audio options for TVs, and that the website, or apps, and any other interface of communication of the AV service with the final user would include the Catalan language in their written messages and verbal messages, for example, in the selection menus for the title of the work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Personally, I'm really blown away by the quality of your French. Thank you very much, Danielle Condeminas. And finally, to conclude, well, we'll have a Q&A after that, of course. We will certainly take a bit of time, even if we are a bit late, but I'll give the floor to Christine Merkel. I want to remind you that she's Director of the Division of Culture and Memory of the World of the German Commission for UNESCO. Good day, Ms. Merkel. Will you speak in German or in Spanish, French, English? Which language in English?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. I really want to comment the organizers of bringing this great webinar together at the beginning of the year 2022. Indeed, I was the head of the division at the German Commission until last April. I still continue work in the field of the convention, both as a member of the expert facility. And in the subject we're discussing today, I studied in depth the making of the European Union Audiovisual Service Media Directive when we were writing UNESCO's Global Monitoring Report 2018, where I had the honor to author the media diversity chapter. So this was the momentum, and we heard it explained very well by colleague Sophie Valais, how this new level of a European legal media framework is trying. I put then the subtitle, it's seeking pathways to quota 4.0. It was probably the first serious effort to update thinking in media regulations to meet some of the challenges of the digital environment. And while in your title, you ask us to examine the transposition, I also would like us to understand that the national and the European Union processes went very much hand in hand. It was almost like parallel processes, because the European Union directive was prepared from 2015 onwards, starting indeed with an evaluation, like the one which will be programmed in 2026. And this is important. So it's like evidence, it's an effort to do evidence-based policy development. And the 2016 evaluation of the former audiovisual directive was rather positive. It was saying that for most of the stakeholders, it had achieved its purpose. And in Germany, almost at the same time, state and federal level were already installing commissions how to update the legislation. And so it's not that we waited until late 2018 when the directive wording was ready and then started national legislation. It somehow was a co-producing learning process, because while of course the legislative framework is key for regulating in particularly the intermediaries, and I will come to that in a minute, it's also interesting to see that especially public service media adopted a design thinking way, already launching pilots like a new youth service for the age group 14 to 29, which is being transmitted through 60 different digital channels. This was already launched in 2016. And why? For the obvious reason that all data showed that public service media is losing this generation. So practice already was faster than legislation. And this is also typical of the stage we are in. In that sense, just to give you the raw data, when the directive was adopted in late 2018, the German process, which like Canada has the beauty of being a federal one, was a process involving the 16 states, which each have a a regulatory body of their own. And they worked throughout 2019 in a pretty participatory multi-stakeholder process to amend the legislation, which, like in Canada, was almost like 25 years old. And that led to the State Treaty on Media being adopted in December 2019, shortly before Christmas, and entering into force almost a year later in November 2020. We speak now in January 22, though this is a pretty brand new piece of legislation which has been around 30 months only. So it's early days to see the effectiveness of it. However, what is important to understand, especially also colleagues from Latin America and Africa who are joining us here in the webinar, that when a nation state does its own legislation, then the law is sent back to the Commission, which double-checked, in this case, the compatibility with the European Union Audiovisual Directive. This is also one of the reasons why easily it can take a year until then the law enters into vigor. Plus, in the German case, 16 states needed to discuss it in their parliaments and have it signed. So this is the democracy process which is involved. So easily we see the big challenge of the 21st century and the pace of digital economy. This was a 7-year process in a very fast moving field. So this is definitely one of the big challenges of regulation and lawmaking in the digital context. However, on the positive note, what certainly can be said that this State Treaty on Media, it completely replaced the older Treaty on Broadcasting, and it basically, in its 124 articles, it does two things. It offers a really, in my reading, 21st century definition and understanding of broadcasting, because for the first time ever, intermediaries of media content are also subject to regulation on equal footing with broadcasters, be them public or private. And by spelling out in details who those intermediaries are, the lawmakers went quite far, even beyond the way those intermediaries would define their role themselves. And this is where the democracy battle is in our times. This is where also civil society stakeholders, private firms and public bodies are in constant friction, and constant struggle. Why? Because the definition is whenever you have a broadcast and journalistic edited content, this intermediary has to obey regulations. And this is true for media platforms. It is valid for user interfaces, hence those platforms giving overviews. It is true for media intermediaries who would aggregate third parties' contents. And this is the novelty, it's also valid for video sharing services, especially YouTube, and including the regulation regarding their advertising policies. Why? Because among the evaluation of the EU Audiovisual Service Media Directive, it became very clear that for our kids and youngsters today, at a very young age, video content is almost the primary cultural content they consume together with mother's milk. And so the question what these 2 and 3 years old have on screens and how, whether advertising content can be distinguished from the edited content is a key issue. It relates in particular to food, but not only. So this is the heart of the new legislation inspired by the EU directive. And the second element is saying that all digital platforms that have joined the classic media as media content providers have now to follow regulations supervised by the 14 state media authorities. So in Germany, we have a platform of 14 different media authority who fulfill the role of public regulator. And so in conclusion, this is valid for Google, Facebook, Twitter, and in particular also YouTube. And it has provision for the discoverability of content, of opinion shaping content, and especially also of public service media content. So this is also a novelty that the so-called gatekeepers, providers of search engines, smart TVs, language assistants, and social media, and the algorithm they use, that they will be included in the scrutiny. While this sounds quite heavy, at the same time, it was also made easier for smaller offers, for example, smaller YouTube channels who reach less than 20,000 people, that they were given the freedom to share their content without asking for broadcasting license, which was an ambiguity in the legislation which existed before. So as such, I would say it's a continuous effort to try and spell out a workable system for the ecosystem as it exists today. As is normal in any vibrant democracy, of course, there was criticism. There were scientists and media experts who were saying the law does not take sufficiently into account media concentration issues. And there were also stakeholders saying it is too far-reaching regarding internet freedom. Also in the dialogue with the European Commission, there were hiccups while the law was validated in being compatible with the Audiovisual Service Media Directive. Berlin got a not so kind letter in summer 2021 criticizing exactly the authority given to state regulators and saying that this was against the country of origin rule as articulated in the e-commerce directive. So this is clearly, as we all know, Google situated in Ireland and Germany not being Ireland. So here it comes to exactly the point which is a novelty in the Audiovisual Service Media Directive. But the reality, when is it accepted that regulators also challenge providers, this remains to be seen in practice. Germany also delivered a note as recently as December 21, to just last month, to the OECD Commission on Competition, because this is an issue of Bundeskartellamt, and the positive note is that anything underlying the need of having a strong media diversity for the sake of democracy, for the sake of cultural diversity, is taken here pretty seriously. But as I said, we are in early days of implementation, and this remains to be monitored and observed very closely. However, it's probably the fastest reaching development we have seen in media policy. And of course, there are also voices of colleagues who say this is now the platform to really kickstart the real development of digital age media and cultural policy. That's all from a European German angle, and I look forward to questions. And thanks again for having us on this January day.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Christine Merkel. On va prendre des questions pour...
So we'll take the questions for 10 minutes, maybe once again. if you still have attention. So there are many questions that were posted on the Q&A. I'll read a few of them. But if panelists want to take the opportunity to answer a question that you can see in the Q&A tab, all I have to do is raise your hand, and I'll start with the first one submitted about an hour ago. Somebody says, YouTube does not have to respect the measures of Section 13 according to the AVMSD, but apparently in France, a tax on physical video and online broadcasting affected to the CNC was implemented, which includes YouTube. Can Mr. Fournet speak about this, and why is there this difference? I hope you understood more than me this question. I'll let you answer. Yes, it's because the CNC had implemented a first tax, which was around 2% many years ago in 2018, and which applied itself, amongst others, on YouTube. So this tax was revisited and it was increased. Now, concerning the obligations of investments, it applies to platforms which, so that they will invest and produce, whether direct production or dependent production or through delegated producers. This is what I explained earlier on. Excellent, thank you very much. Somebody else asked, the European reflections seem to bear essentially on the SVOD platforms audiovisual. Are there reflections concerning online music platforms? I don't know who could answer this question. Yes, Ms. Merkel.
Well, yes and no. As I shared, first of all, I think smaller YouTube channels are primary channels also for sharing music. It's not just audiovisual. And as I said, in addition to working on the legislation, we also saw new broadcasting innovations happening, especially in the radio sphere. For example, a couple of our public broadcasters teamed up to have a multilingual radio platform created that started in 2017. It broadcasts in 11 languages, including German, for the people living in the country. So it's not the international broadcaster, which would go for a multilingual content. It's just taking into account the music and content realities of 80 million people, including many new arrived and refugee people within the country. So in that sense, while we certainly have an iconic term, visceral attention being more compelling than just listening, there is a lot in there which equals also for independent music production.
Okay, thank you. Luanda Smith escribe, veo que las problemáticas son similares en Europa y América Latina con respecto a la regulación audiovisual. ¿Sería pertinente considerar la creación?
So we see that the problems are similar in Europe and Latin America concerning the audiovisual regulation. Would it be relevant to consider the creation of a global model that could be used at a national level? Sincerely, I don't think so. In an obvious way, the systems, the communication systems, audiovisual systems are too variable from country to country. And I would even say from region to region, from one place to the next. So the communication system in contemporaneous societies are through the crystallization of tradition, history, and political forces. So at best, what is new and what occurs in the European Union, where there's a directive which sets minimum levels, and the countries who participate in this space and this economy and geography must reform this system, this legal system, on a minimum basis. But we clearly see that the transposition that France has done has nothing to do with the transposition that Spain is doing currently. And that's the variability we see. So it's utopia in the question. We're very far from a possible reality. And I even wonder if it would be something that would be desirable, that all countries would have the same regulation of these means of communication. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Fournet, do you want to add something? Go ahead, Guillaume, please. Thank you. No, it was just to come back on this question of the perimeter of the AVMSD directive, which targets television services, and now AV platform. It's also related to the history of this directive, which dates from 1997, and which was not called AVMS. It used to be called borderless television. We were always based on a directive which targeted specifically audiovisual services. Then it doesn't mean that in certain number of states, there's no obligation to put forth or at least broadcast music locally or nationally. It's the case in France, for example. But on the radios today, you have quotas for French music. But it's true that in Europe today, we don't have a wording which sets for musical works the same commitments or the same obligations for these streaming services. Do you want to add something, Mr. Fournet? No, it was just to complete what Louise said. Obviously, the transposition of the directive in Europe is very difficult. It's hard to have a unique one-size-fits-all because it still has not been transposed in the same way everywhere. That being said, I think that there is a philosophy, a direction, a path, and that today this path, which was implemented in France and in Italy, will be followed by other countries. So we share a lot with our European counterparts on the implementation of the quota for investment obligations, but also with countries outside Europe. I'm thinking, for example, about Balkan countries like Serbia, who are interested to transpose certain parts of the European directive, but we are also working a lot with Latin America on these issues, or even with countries like South Korea, which are interested to see how we've integrated this for the funding of creation. And we also have co-production and cooperation agreements with many countries. So that doesn't mean that we will just imitate a French model on Uruguay and Tunisia or whatever, but there are exchanges on these texts. And even though we cannot have a single text which covers all the cultural, historical, and legal histories, at least we can have a mind, a spirit to protect the creation and to protect cultural diversity and so on. Excellent, thank you.
The EU an organism to control how the states transpose directives. Looks like in terms of cultural diversity and of the specific purpose of the directive, Spanish law doesn't perform well. And then the question is asked in Spanish, so I'll let you respond.
Okay, thank you very much. I will answer in Spanish. Bueno, desconozco exactamente cuál es el mecanismo, sí, como comentaba al principio.
So, when I said at the beginning of my presentation that the transposition of the directive is compulsory, and for the countries member of the European Union, and of course, there's a certain control for the Spanish legislation. We cannot say that the video on-demand service has to have 10% of European content. You know, when the European directive says 30%, well, there'll be conflict. And in the European Union, you know, they can have different, there can be differences between the European Union and the individual countries, but we have to observe the transposition. You know, if there's a new legislation which is directed towards the operators, but who are not in the country, but who operate in that market, that there'd be a quota of 30% as a minimum. All this type of thing, yes. But of course, as in the project, the bill, which allowed that a private broadcaster who does a contest so that the community medias cannot fund themselves while using publicity, well, the European Union will intervene. So obviously, I would say that Spain doesn't do it very well. Well, this is what comes out of my critical analysis of this topic, of this bill.
Thank you. Merci. Gracias. En terminant, une dernière question, peut-être.
So to conclude, one last question, perhaps, Isabel Ravento.
Is there any country in EU that in the process of this transposition has taken into account and included positive actions for women as they were recommended by European Parliament in 2018? So if someone wants to answer that question regarding positive actions for women. Go ahead, Luis.
Sí, en el caso de España, el proyecto de ley tiene una disposición.
Now, in the case of Spain, the bill has a clause which says that needs need to be taken to foster audiovisual production made by women. And the third additional clause of this law but it so in their 3-year plan, it's part of the bill, but truly it's surprising that with the strength of the feminist movement in that country, in Spain, that there is a fairly low development of means to ensure equality of genders in this bill.
If I may quickly thank you for this question, which is an important one. You might also be aware of the Global Media and Gender Alliance, which is monitoring that field very closely. For Germany, I would say the gender justice issue in cultural media politics has become very much to the forefront over the last 5 years, not necessarily linked only to this legislative process, but stemming indeed from very active and evidence-based work in the sector itself. And this is all encompassing from issues like preferential treatment needs and rebalancing. It's also linked to the SDG horizon, where we clearly have with SDG 5 gender justice as a key issue to reducing inequalities. So not specifically in this legal level, but very much linked to media and culture policy. Yes, so thanks for this question.
All right, thank you. Et finalement, le mot de la fin, Daniel?
Daniel, concluding words?
Merci. En complément de ce que Luis Alfonso l'inégalité entre les sexes.
The inequality between genders needs the establishment of a quota or something specific in the law. This is clear. This seems necessary. Thank you. Brief, concise, quite clear. Thank you. Would you like to add something, Mathieu Fournet? Yeah, in France, the CNC put some measures many years ago regarding parity. There needs to be equality in key posts. And finally, to answer Danielle that was worrying about the space reserved for regional languages. In France, we have French expression, but this not only includes French, but also regional languages. And this is part of the subquota of the OEF. Yeah, I think that Danielle and Matthew, you have many things to say if you had to meet. So thank you very much. I would like to thank the CDEC to have organized this event. Thank you to all the presenters. Thank you for talking about equality, regulation, anything that has to do with media. Thank you very much for your work. Thank you for explaining it well. You know, there's many details. We don't know all the rules and regulations all over the world. Thank you very much for your presence. Thank you also to the interpreters. Your work is quite important, and so we understand each other better. Thank you very much. So please come back at 2:30 for the next roundtable. So Kate Taylor will be with you for the afternoon. So thank you very much. Gracias, danke schön. Well, enjoy your meal if that's the case. See you soon.